Okay, tell me what his name is again.
It is, go ahead, Arrow.
You just said
It's Arrow.
Hi, Arrow.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Good morning, Beth. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Arrow. How are you?
Very, very well, because I can't wait to talk with you because, I mean, first of all, this is journalism at a really great level because I don't watch the 5 o'clock news the same anymore. I get my news from podcasts like this because I get the real story.
I'm so glad that you said that because, I worked in TV news for 20 years. And one of the reasons I left was because I was feeling really dissatisfied with the length of stories and how superficial it had become. And I wanted to pursue projects like this because there's always so much that doesn't get to go into stories in traditional media. And podcasts, you can go as long as you want. And that's what makes them so juicy and so substantive.
I'll never forget when I was sitting down with my general manager and I was explaining to him, that, dude, this is a great way that you can put advertising on there and it tells the real story of the artists and the authors. And he goes, I don't know what you're doing, just keep doing it. And I'm going, what? It's right here. It's in plain sight.
Yeah. It's, sometimes the business, it takes a little while for everybody to get on board. But I think podcasts are here and they're here to stay.
Absolutely. I was with the people from dictionary.com a few weeks ago, and I got to tell you, Earwitness, is it in there? Because, I fell in love with that the second I saw it.
I don't know if it's in the dictionary, but it's definitely a term that the legal community and police know about. An earwitness is like an eyewitness in criminal cases, but they hear something. And so the reason that we titled the series Earwitness is because the key witness that landed Toforest Johnson on Alabama's death row is the testimony of an earwitness, a woman who claims that she overheard him talking about the crime on a three-way call that she eavesdropped on. But we also thought that we're asking listeners to be earwitnesses to this. We want them to really settle in and listen as we unpack this case from the very beginning, in a way that podcasts really allow you to do, to go deep and long, to go down every rabbit hole that a TV news reporter can't go down. And so that's the genesis of the title Earwitness.
Wow. I'll tell you the thing that scares me the most about Earwitness, and this might be an example of that, is that I read the book Blind Gorilla, where we think we see something, but we really don't. Isn't the mind the same way on the things that we listen to? It's like, I think I heard it right, but we don't always get it right.
Yeah, I think that there's actually studies out there that earwitness testimony is actually more unreliable than eyewitness testimony. And we already know that eyewitness testimony is unreliable. Like you said, people remember things differently over time and they start to, tell themselves a story about what they remember. So the thing that makes this earwitness testimony so outrageously unreliable is that the woman who claims that she overheard Toforest Johnson talking on this call didn't know him, had never heard him speak. She knew the victim in the case, so she was paying attention to media coverage after the murder happened. And she has claimed all along that the only reason she came forward was because her conscience bothered her. But now we know she also came forward in pursuit of the reward money that was offered in this case. And that information was not told to the jury, and the state did not disclose the reward payment for 17 years.
Oh, my God.
So, not only is this case the flimsiest of evidence, this one witness who claims she overheard something, she was a paid witness, and the jury never knew that. So, when I tell people the kind of elevator pitch on this story, they initially react with skepticism, like, oh, well, no, that can't be the whole story. They had to have something else on this guy. There had to be more to it. People don't end up on death row on that kind of evidence. But once they start listening to the podcast, that's the realization is, oh my God, yes, this did happen. And it's still happening because he's still on death row.
Especially when Mr. Johnson, you clearly state this, he was at a popular nightclub 4 miles away. How can you be in two places at the same time?
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the big conflicts in this story is he was at a nightclub called T's Place. It was very crowded the night of the murder because it was Tasty Tuesday and ladies get in free.
Yes.
And so he was there with his buddies and they were, hanging out and drinking and meeting women. And there are 10 witnesses that have either signed affidavits or testified under oath that they remember seeing him there in the same time frame that the deputy, Bill Hardy, was murdered 4 miles away. But unfortunately, that wasn't enough.
I know that you're going to try to keep it at 8 episodes, but isn't something very big supposed to happen today in the U.S. Supreme Court? That would call for another episode.
Actually, we just got word in the last 30 minutes that the Supreme Court has denied review of Toforest Johnson's case. Yeah, it sounds terrible. And of course, as human beings, if we suspect that there's an innocent person in prison, especially on death row, it's unbearable to think about a court, especially the Supreme Court, turning the case down. In reality, the Supreme Court takes up so few cases that it was a long shot, and he still has pending appeals in state and federal court that he and his legal team will focus on. So it was not good news, but it's not the final blow. He still has some legal avenues that his team is pursuing.
Listeners need to know this is not an overnight thing that you jumped into. You actually started this journey in 2019. We're 4 years strong into this. And I mean, I can't imagine what that news from the Supreme Court today did to your soul, because a lot of your time and energy in building this story right there, I was expecting a victory today.
Yeah, I've really had to become a lot more realistic about how these things work. And, I'm not a lawyer. So to me, it's like, hey, all these people are saying this guy is innocent. This evidence is crap. We're all in agreement here. Why is he still on death row? But that's not the way the law works, and one thing that I've really had to learn and accept up close and personal is you can't argue that someone is innocent. Like, that's literally not a legal argument that you can make post conviction. Once somebody is convicted and sent to death row, the way that they have to argue or try to overturn their case is through these, different legal claims and sometimes granular issues. So even if somebody is innocent and it's so obvious that they're innocent, you can't put that in front of a court. That's not really a valid legal claim. And so that's why he's going after some of these other parts of his case that are equally appalling. But so far, the system has said it's okay and perfectly legal.
Wow. When you jumped into this podcast, or the idea first was introduced to you to do it, did you feel doubt in that moment, or was it when you started doing the investigation that all of a sudden doubt became something that you put in your heart?
You mean doubt about his guilt?
Yes. Yeah.
I first started covering this case in 2019, as you mentioned, when I was still working as a TV news reporter. Mm-hmm. I was at WBRC, the largest TV station in Alabama, and they sent me to court to cover this hearing regarding this undisclosed reward payment. I didn't know if Toforest Johnson was innocent or not. I really wasn't familiar with the case and didn't know a whole lot about it. And I think I felt like most people feel when they hear the details. I assumed that there was probably more to the case than just this earwitness testimony. Once I covered this hearing and I got my hands on the trial transcripts and read through what happened in court, back in 1997 and 1998. That's when I realized, oh my God, this guy really is on death row because one person claimed she overheard him talk about the crime, and that's it. And so that's when I felt a shift within me that this is almost certainly a case of actual innocence. And then the journalist in me really wanted to know, how in the world did this happen? Mm-hmm. How did this guy get caught up in this? And how did the state successfully get a conviction based on just this ear witness? And so that's really what we unpack in the podcast is kind of a reverse whodunit, with Toforest Johnson being at the center on death row, and we unwind how he ended up there and all of the steps that had to happen and all of the missteps.
So this happening in your backyard, your home state, the law. Now here's the thing. Do they know who you are, and do they know how you worked on television as a journalist? Because, I mean, it would be one of those things where it's like, oh, my God, here she comes. Okay, you guys, this is what we have to do as a team. Make sure she doesn't get everything.
I started covering Alabama's criminal justice system in 2012. And I've done extensive reporting on our prison system, which is in total crisis. And the Department of Justice has sued the state over these just horrific conditions inside our prison system. So I think that I already had a reputation of pushing back against, the official story, because every time I did a story on horrific things happening in the prisons, the state would try to say, oh, nothing to see here. Don't believe what these inmates are telling you. And then it turns out what the inmates were saying was absolutely true, and then some. And so I developed a very healthy skepticism of what the state was saying. I think that, for 20 years, I worked in traditional media, and even if there's somebody that I find outrageously not believable, I will sit down with them and try to parse through their position and give them, a fair shot. I think that that's important. But we do take a position in this podcast kind of right out of the gate that we believe in Toforest, and we didn't keep that a secret. I think that's what makes it so unusual that I was able to sit down with the lead detective and the lead prosecutor. A lot of times these podcasts, have the reporter chasing after some of the main people that were involved in the conviction, and those people never want to talk to the reporter. But they actually came to the microphone and talked to me for hours and hours. So it wasn't a case of us not having enough material. We had too much, and we really had to, kind of boil it down to what we felt was most important and, give everybody a fair say in what was going on at the time and how they feel about it now.
I have to give you kudos for what you just said about, having the people on there, because I listen to so many podcasts and I watch a lot of documentaries. I don't want other people sharing the story. I want to hear the authentic people sharing the story. And you do that very well with this. And it's got a nice balance to it as well.
I really appreciate you saying that, because we worked very, very hard to strike that balance. I've actually, the pushback that I've been getting from listeners has been that I wasn't hard enough on like the lead detective, Tony Richardson. But I really felt like, he was being honest. And even if we don't agree with him or find his positions outrageous, he is letting us see into the mind of a detective. And I think that I wanted listeners to kind of sit with that and think about it. And so me challenging him on everything I disagreed with, or every time he said something outrageous, I don't think he would have talked to me for 7 hours on the record. So we had to kind of pick our battles. And I think listeners are smart enough to where, they can come to their own conclusions. They don't need me to tell them.
Yeah, because you and I are both in journalism in the way that we understand how to bring down the energy, get the conversation started, ask the questions, and then question the answers. You don't have to aggressively go after them. Just be a part of their energy flow.
Yeah. And, these are career law enforcement people that have, hundreds, maybe thousands of cases under their belt. And this is one case. And I think, putting it in that context and sort of giving them the space to talk about what's a very complicated job that they have, and certainly a high-profile case that they feel many different ways about. I think we were able to get to something a lot more interesting and important than we would have if I would have just gotten in their faces and yelled at them. Yeah. They were difficult interviews. I mean, I felt really beat up after all of them because things were said that I found outrageous. Mm-hmm. But I, like I said, had to pick my battles. So, there were times that I just kind of sat there trying to maintain a poker face and let them talk. And sometimes they hang themselves that way, but it's definitely an art and not a science.
Yeah, because the pause. I always want the pause. And sometimes you don't have to ask a question. You just make a statement. And all of a sudden you're going, oh, here we go. You just gave me something to hold on to.
Well, I mean, and listeners will hear that in multiple places with Detective Tony Richardson, because he makes several pretty outrageous statements. One that comes to mind is we talk about police coercion, mm-hmm. because clearly some of these young witnesses were coerced when he was interrogating them, and we've got the tapes to prove it. And he tells me that nobody does that. Maybe they did it in the 1800s, but no police coerce witnesses. I mean, what could I say to that? It was so outrageous, and my blood pressure just went through the roof when he said it. I thought to myself, just let that sit there. Like, it's so out there. I can't even begin to challenge it. And so let's just let him say that. Let's let him make that statement himself. And, listeners can all scream in their cars or wherever they're listening. And there's just no point in me pushing back because some of the things that were said are just so absurd. I think it's better just to leave it there.
Wow. Where can people go to find out more about you? Because once they hear this podcast, they're going to go, oh my God, I have to hear more from her.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. I'm on Twitter. I guess it's called X now. Yeah. So I'm at B Shelburne, and I have a Substack called Moth to Flame, where I write about mostly criminal justice issues, but also life in Alabama and, different things outside of justice and wrongful convictions. But those are the two places where I am. And then, of course, we'll have episodes dropping through the end of October, nice. Each Tuesday on, wherever people listen to podcasts.
I love it. Please come back to this show anytime in the future, Beth. The door is always going to be open for you.
I appreciate it, Arrow. Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
You be brilliant today, okay?
Thanks. You too.